one of you took some measure to be part of this presentation in spite of the strike. So my PhD presentation is titled Optimization and Control of Energy Storage in Smart Grid. I'll initiate my talk with a brief motivation and then go into details of the contributions made during this thesis. So traditionally, power system consisted of consumers which were spread around geographically, and there is some centralized entity which acts as a transmission and distribution facility which transports the power from controllable generators. So most of the generators, they can turn on or off when commanded. The only constraint is how fast they can do that. So the centralized entity, it can be a DSO, ISO, sends a signal so that the generation follows the loop. And this system was very highly reliable. All developed countries had a reliability of this network of exceeding 99.99%. However, this is going to change, and this metamorphosis is happening because of two reasons. How consumers used to consume load is changing. New loads are evolving, such as electric vehicles, which have high level of synchronization. Then there is bulk renewable generation, which is coming on the generation side. At the same time, consumers are installing distributed generation, which is increasing the intermittency. So because of this, the power system has a more stylized version, can be represented something like this, in which you have bulk generation, which is creating uncertainty, at the same time distributed generation at the load side. Now, in order to have more responsive consumers, the centralized entity have installed something as, or created something as energy markets. The orange line here shows the flow of information, and these flow of information are operating at different time scales. For example, day-ahead scheduling of controllable generators can be done at a different time scale compared to how households are being charged for the electricity prices. At the same time, there may be fast ramping resources such as utility-owned or privately owned storage or flexibility, which can operate at faster time scales to provide real-time balancing. So this whole network need to have a balance, otherwise the reliability degrades. And in order to that, the centralized entity wants responsive participants. So consumers get benefited by responding to price signals which are sent to them. Similarly, bulk infrastructure facilities get incentivized financially, or if they are owned by the utility, then they enhance the reliability as the main goal. So in this thesis, we talk about energy storage providing different services. So we develop optimization and control algorithms specifically for lithium-ion batteries. So the motivation for choosing lithium-ion batteries here is presently more than 80% of batteries in the power grid is lithium-ion, so that motivates us to do that. Now, lithium-ion battery have life constraints, so it degrades over life, and you would like to take the health aspect and integrate that with the optimization and control. So we have done some attempt in this direction, and the key contributions of the thesis, two of which I'll discuss more in detail, is energy arbitrage and co-optimization, and I'll provide a brief outline of the contributions made for storage for large-scale application. And I'll summarize the health aspect of the battery, how we have taken, but not going into the detail. So moving on to the first contribution, which is energy arbitrage. So the motivation for performing energy arbitrage is now consumers are witnessing time-varying electricity prices. So it has been shown that consumers do not tend to change their consumption behavior. So if they integrate a battery at their end, then they can modify their consumption pattern, at the same time without reducing the total energy that they consume. So the key contributions are we develop convex optimization and LP-based arbitrage formulations, and then compare these formulations with a new algorithm which is using Lagrangian theory. And the two properties are using this structure, we identify that the optimal solution of operating batteries under time-varying prices has a threshold-based structure. So we exactly quantify these thresholds, and because we identify this structure, we can explicitly find out the worst case complexity, which is quadratic for this algorithm. Then extending this formulation for a real-time setting using forecast along with MPC. So for this part of my thesis, the publications related to this part are listed here. So I'll describe the system that we are using for energy arbitrage, which is consumer, which is connected, so it can be a residential or a low voltage consumer, and it has a PV which is varying over time, and the goal is to control the battery charging and discharging modes in such a way that the consumer actually makes profit or deviates the cost that they might incur without having a battery. So this key work is motivated by a bunch of papers earlier published by James Cruz and his team. The key difference between our work and their work is we are operating under a special case that they consider. So we are considering a piecewise linear cost function, unlike what they consider a strictly convex cost function, because of our structure, we need to have a two algorithm, which I'll show, a forward and a backward algorithm. Further, in our setting, we use consumer load and renewable generation. So in their setting, they are only operating the battery under time varying basis. Before I go into the details of the algorithm, I would like to discuss net energy metering. So net energy metering facilitates consumers to supply power back to the grid. So we are using two definitions which California established, and so net metering 1.0 was a policy which was proposed by California to initiate or accelerate the growth of the distributed generation, and that was very successful. So more than 1 million consumers in California already have some part of their electricity being produced by distributed generation. Now this was also creating a disparity for non-DG owners, and because of that they created some friction, making selling price slightly lower and in some cases significantly lower than the buying price. So this is second net metering 2.0. So once they have reached, one region has reached a cap that the utility set, then they propose net metering 2.0. In fact, in France we have something similar to net metering 2.0, in which buying and selling prices are different. Selling price is drastically smaller compared to buying price. First we discuss the battery model. So the battery model consists of the Xi denotes the change in the charge level in form of energy at time instant I, and Si is the output power seen by the grid. So Si during discharging will be lower than Xi because of the discharging losses, and because of the charging efficiency losses, Si will be higher. So there will be more power supplied to the battery for charging because of the charging efficiency losses. So there are two constraints taken into account here: the energy constraint, which bounds the battery capacity, so within a minimum and maximum. So for batteries such as lithium-ion, it is prescribed not to charge beyond a certain level and discharge beyond a certain level. So that puts those physical bounds. And then there is a power constraint, which is how fast the battery can charge or discharge. So this is in units of power, and then multiplying it by the sampling time of decision making, we get the energy that can be taken out of the battery or fed into the battery at any time. So this, as I mentioned, the system consists of a load of end user consumption and solar generation. So this variable is denoted as Zi, and price of electricity here is denoted as Pi. So if we extend this optimization problem, what we see that there's a constant component in the optimization which is not affecting my cost function. So what we observe is, if we operate under net metering 1.0, in which buying and selling prices are the same, in that case my cost function is independent of net load and solar generation. So this is over a horizon. So from I to n, n is the number of instance in the time horizon we consider. And if we plot this cost function for any time instant I, what we observe is this has a piecewise linear structure, which is continuous and increasing in time, having no derivative at point 0. And this is clearly a convex function, and that's why we use convex optimization tools. So it actually depends on what decision variable we select. So whether the cost function is convex or not. So in this case, we select xi, which is the change in the charge level at time instant I. So if we use a strong Lagrangian theory and simplify this, what we observe is that the optimization function, which was ranging from time instant I to n, can be minimized into a point-by-point minimization, in which mu I captures the future variations of prices in this case. So mu I is the accumulated Lagrange multiplier, which is the summation of all my Lagrange multipliers, and these alphas and betas are associated with battery capacity violating an upper or lower boundary. And that's why whenever battery capacity is not touching the boundary, the next mu I is going to be same as the previous mu I, which indicates that the battery capacity is not violating any boundary. And how we take this definition of mu i's into realistic in this case is, whenever mu I is constant, we define that region as a subhorizon. So what it means is, so this whole time horizon can be fragmented into smaller time horizon, and these smaller subhorizons have some certain properties which we'll discuss, like how these mu's are getting selected. So the value of mu depends on the price levels only in this small region, which makes the algorithm very, very fast, and which we can say that the optimization, if we need to optimize within only subhorizon, future variations, accurate prediction of future variations are not essential in this case. I'll demonstrate that with an example, but next level is how do we, with this cost function, if we have to minimize it for each time, consider a lossless battery in which there is no charging and discharging efficiency. So in that case, I'll have 3 levels based on my price level. So this cost function is minimized, and these are the states. So what we see is, whenever mu is equal to the price at that time instant, then basically we have an envelope-like structure. We have a lower bound and an upper bound. This part does not give us a fixed solution, but gives us an envelope of solutions possible. So if we extend this to a lossy battery in which we have charging and discharging losses, so what we observe is number of thresholds have increased by 2, and similarly for the second level is how do we search these values of mu? Because in earlier works there has been a continuous search problem, which in itself is very is not easy. And how we propose is, this mu is a function of price levels and the charging and discharging efficiency. We'll demonstrate this with an example. So we can see that this along with the subhorizon will give us an envelope of solution. So the optimization algorithm for arbitrage in this case consists of 2 components. The first component finds the envelope of solution, which maximizes the length of identified subhorizon. That is equivalent to saying as matching the primal and dual solution. So once we have this envelope in the subhorizon, it's sent to algorithm 2, which returns the optimal solution. And I'll show this how both these algorithms work together. So consider P1. So consider prices are in ascending order. So P1 is lower than P2 and so on. So for first case, we initiate our algorithm from mu is equal to 0. So if we see these threshold-based levels, then the battery should discharge at the maximum rate. And what we see is, between I is equal to 1 and 2, there is the battery capacity is violating the lower boundary, and the new subhorizon, this is like a temporary subhorizon that we identified, has only 1 point. So the next level of jump from mu is equal to 0 will be to the next price level in the subhorizon that we already identified, which is mu is equal to P1. And once we reach to P1, then we satisfy the second condition, in which there is an upper and lower level. So in this case, we'll have an envelope. But for P2, since P2 is higher than P1, the optimal thing to do is to discharge at the maximum rate. So we see that from one point in the subhorizon, we have reached to 2 points, and we keep doing progressively, changing the value of mu to the next higher level of prices. And why do we put the higher level? Because we are violating the capacity boundary from the lower level. Had it been the other case, we need to decrease the value of mu to the next lower level. So if we keep increasing, we see the length of subhorizon keeps increasing, and we do this iteratively till the length of subhorizon increases. What we observed is any further increase from this point, it actually degrades, reduces the length of subhorizon. We go back to the previous, which maximizes my length of subhorizon, and we fix this, and this is what is sent to the second part of the algorithm, which fixes the optimal solution. So the second part of the algorithm, suppose there is a violation from the lower capacity boundary, then it fixes at B min and backtracks it one time to identify the optimal solution. So this is the optimal solution. In this case, now if the algorithm proceeds from here, then it has to start from I is equal to 7. It does not have to look from. So this algorithm assumes accurate information is already known, which might not be the case, but we'll show how this can be extended to an MPC setting. So the worst case complexity, because we have limited number of jumps, limited number of price levels in the time horizon that we are trying to optimize, and in each of these price levels that we are trying to identify the sub-horizon, we have some simple mathematical like plus and minus. So if we add all these computational steps, we observe that the worst case complexity is quadratic. And numerically, we'll show how in real implementing it is much better than quadratic. It turns out to be close to linear. So just to give a high-level flavor of what this shadow price or accumulated Lagrange multiplier is. So this is a numerical example for a lossless battery in which charging and discharging there are no losses. So the first plot shows electricity price, and the second plot shows the mu. So see, mu looks like a low-pass filter version of the electricity price. So it changes whenever the battery capacity reaches B min or B max. So here I'm showing both the envelopes, the lower and upper, and the optimal battery capacity shown in the black line in between. And this plot shows the ramp rate, charging and discharging. For example, since the battery is lossless, even this small peak, there is a charge and discharge cycle which is going on, which will not be occurring if there is a charging and discharging losses. So how do we extend this algorithm for net metering 2.0, because that is the most general case. So it turns out the cost function still remains convex. So this is, suppose I have, whenever my load is positive, I'm applying a buying price, and whenever my load is negative, then I'm actually supplying power back to the grid, so I'm receiving a selling price. So the cost function plotted based on the sign of the net load. Net load indicates includes the consumer inelastic load minus the renewable generation. So if the net load is positive, then we see the structure of the cost function is something presented here, and both these cost function remains convex provided PS, which is the selling price at any time, is lower than buying price. So we are lucky enough that the selling price is lower than buying price in the policies that are designed. So because of that, we have convexity here, and we observe the same structure of solution that we present for net metering 1.0 can be extended for this with much more number of thresholds, because now load and the sign of the load is important in deciding what battery actions should be taken. Yeah. I'll provide some numerical results to show how our algorithm performs compared to other methods such as convex optimization and linear programming. So the first plot here shows the convex optimization based arbitrage solution. The second is LP based, which grows at polynomial time, and it becomes intractable. For both these optimization methods become intractable if the time horizon is higher than 1000 time instants. And this third is our proposed algorithm. So the blue line shows net metering 1.0, which is no load into picture, and the red line shows with load. So with load, as I said, the number of thresholds increases, so the complexity or the computation time slightly increases. And so LP-based strategy is also proposed in this thesis, which is detailed in the appendix of the thesis.
Which slide?
Okay, I'm on slide number 20.
Okay.
Alright. Okay, so giving more, so now I'm going to slide 21, which shows another set of numerical results in real-time setting in which we are trying to do an MPC with forecasting. So these are 3 batteries. So the first battery has a charging and discharging time of 4 hours. This can be similar to, say, lithium-ion batteries. And this is a battery which takes 15 minutes to charge and 15 minutes to discharge. So this can be like a flywheel. What we observe is the role of accurate information in performing arbitrage is much more essential for batteries which are faster ramping. So the deterministic gain is the gain in which we know everything in future, and we are trying to calculate the optimal states. And the black line here shows scenario MPC. So there are 1,000 scenarios, and we are trying to maximize the expected value. And then there is a point forecast based MPC shown in red. So we do an ARIMA forecast for electricity price, and we have one information for the future, and we are trying to do MPC with that, and we are using day ahead. So clearly day ahead is very, very bad. The other methods, the gap between optimality for scenario and ARIMA based point forecast is significant. Like it's here almost 60%. However, the gap is almost less than 4% for a slow battery. So what it says that uncertainty affects batteries. The effect of uncertainty is dependent on what battery parameters we choose. The second plot shows here the variation of suppose my electricity price is varying. So I'm injecting Gaussian noise and performing thousands of simulations. And when we do box plot, what we see is as my variance of electricity price will increase, it will become more and more profitable for storage owners to perform arbitrage. So with this, I'll conclude this first part. So in this part, we observe that the arbitrage problem has a threshold-based structure, and because of this structure, we can explicitly categorize the worst-case complexity of the algorithm to be quadratic in nature. Then we divide the problem into sub-horizons, and these sub-horizons are the optimal look-ahead horizons, and that makes the whole optimization problem very efficient. We also observe that the optimal storage actions can have intermediate ramp rates. There are many earlier works which claim that batteries should be operated at either maximum, minimum, or 0, which clearly is not true. Then we see that effect of uncertainty on arbitrage is governed by battery parameters, how pricing is done, and what are the charging and discharging efficiencies. So all these claims are being shown using some sort of case studies, realistic case studies, of different data from different parts of the world. With this, we move to the second part, which is on co-optimization of batteries. Again, batteries are very expensive, and often doing one dedicated task using batteries make it non-financially viable. And further, electricity utilities and energy providing companies are becoming more innovative in how they design the electricity bill. For example, in California, they have a peak demand charge, which corresponds to the maximum demand that the consumer has over a month, and they are charged for the maximum demand over the month. And this almost constitutes about 50% of the bill for consumers in some cases. So it means that the consumers need to take care of not just one thing, but several things. And we'll look into some of these models. We propose 3 formulations for co-optimizing batteries. And then we, again, use the same strategy to implement it in real time with using forecast and model predictive control. And we do 2 case studies for real world. I'm going to describe one case study for Madeira, and other for Uruguay is detailed in the thesis. And so we use convex optimization and inverter control and some relaxation strategies to convexify the problems. So the first problem, before I start the first co-optimization model, I would like to give a brief introduction about, so this is the list of publications for this part. So active and reactive power are in Cartesian coordinates can be represented like something like this. And the angle between apparent power and active power is the power factor angle. And if you take the cos, which is the ratio of active and reactive apparent power, is a typical indicator of one of the indicators of power quality. And as power factor degrades, then what we observe is the losses will increase, the ability to transfer active power over the network reduces, which we can see here. Suppose for a cable which has unit amount of apparent power carrying capacity, as my power factor deteriorates, which implies that my reactive power is consuming or occupying most of the space in my cable, and my active power carrying capacity is linearly decreasing. What it means is, suppose for a utility, for a low voltage consumer operating at say 0.5 power factor, will consume a lot more reactive energy, which is not even built, and so it's essential that consumers maintain power factor. However, that was not very crucial because power factor typically for low voltage consumers were close to 0.9 or higher. So, but now I'll demonstrate that using a case study, that power factor degradation is a real problem which can happen because of DGs in future. I'll describe some notation used in this part. So a battery, which is a DC source, is interfaced with using a AC to DC converter, which can act as charger or discharger, and the active and reactive power output of the battery is denoted as, so all active power are denoted by P, and all reactive are denoted by Q. And the notation used for the home, so the system remains the same as the first part. Now we have to, so we deal in complex components. Okay. So next I present a case study which motivated us to do this problem, and which is a data collected from Madeira. So the first plot here shows the active power consumed by a load, a consumer, with and without solar. So with solar, you can see, which is presented in red line, and the blue line shows with solar. So with solar, the active power kind of significantly reduces during the day, and all the reactive power is seen by the grid. So because PV inverter is operating at unity power factor, so all the reactive power is seen by the grid, and all active power is seen by some of the active power is seen by the grid. So what we see is, because of integration of solar in this case, the power factor during the day significantly deteriorates. Now consider majority, as in case of Madeira, one of the branches have 20%, up to 20% renewable. In that case, the power factor seen by the substation significantly deteriorates. And it goes all the way to 0.5 in this case, but it can go even lower. So what we observe, the goal here is to develop a co-optimization model considering batteries are there, and they need to perform arbitrage based on price variation. Now the question is, can we also do power factor correction with this? So the challenge here is this co-optimization problem is non-convex in nature, and why is it non-convex is shown here. So there are two cases shown here. The first plot shows the storage feasible operating region when there is no load. So clearly this disjoint structure of the optimization have, we cannot claim it convex, and similarly this shape of feasible region based on power factor keeps on evolving based on what is my operating region. Now how do we convexify this problem is, clearly if we can separate these two regions and try to, then we can convexify the problem, and we'll show how we do that. So in this co-optimization setting, we are using a penalty function which penalizes the power factor. So whenever the power factor is leading or lagging is more than or less than certain level, in this case, say whenever power factor is beyond these k and minus k, this is not actually power factor, but the tan of the theta, not the power factor cos of theta, but tan of theta. So why we take tan is because it simplifies and linearizes. So it has a piecewise linear structure, and we can denote this cost function in terms of max function. Whenever the power factor is beyond certain level, then only it's active, otherwise it's not. We can denote this into two sub-constraints. Now, how do we deal with this absolute value? So we can denote this again with a binary variable, and when we extend, we find out that we have two bilinear terms, which are product of the binary term plus the reactive component, and similarly for the active component. Now it turns out that we can use McCormick relaxation, which creates a bounds, which creates space in a feasible region, space of feasible region, and we are trying to, so suppose y is the product of a binary variable and p has a lower and upper bound, and z already have an upper and lower bound which is well defined, which is 0 and 1. In that case, what we see is the feasible region has a shape, and now this approximation becomes exact for cases when one of these variables is binary, and which is shown in this earlier work. Now merging all the constraints and so our cost function have the arbitrage component. Now we denote theta as the penalty function. So whenever it penalizes my power factor violation, the set of constraints I'll go through without going into detail. So first is the ramp constraint, which is how fast the battery can charge or discharge. Then there is a converter size, so how much apparent power then the converter can supply. Then there is capacity of the battery, which is also evolving over time. Then this constraint D shows the piecewise penalty function, in which when it penalizes whenever the power factor is more than or less than certain value. And in order to simplify these bilinear terms, which we have denoted in the previous constraint, we have these four constraints for each of these bilinear terms. So it turns out that this problem can be solved as a mixed integer convex optimization problem using traditional solvers such as CDX and GuruV along with it. So one key observation that I would like to highlight is until and unless we make the converter size for the battery too small compared to the active power rating of the battery, we see that active and reactive control are typically decoupled. So providing power factor correction does not affect my ability to perform arbitrage. So we extend this formulation for peak demand saving. In this case, so the constraint remains the same as in the previous slide. So the first component arbitrage, second component is my penalty for power factor, and the third component here shows the peak component. So now the challenge here is to how do we deal with the different time scales, because peak demand charge is often applicable over a time scale of a month. So if we start solving this optimization problem for a month, it becomes intractable and we are not able to solve it. So we introduce a concept of a memory variable which captures the peak which already has occurred, and every time an optimization is done for only a look ahead horizon for 1 day, and this previous max captures what has already happened. If the previous peak is higher than what the consumer is witnessing now, then this component becomes inactive. Using this strategy, we are able to mix these two different time scales in the co-optimization formulation. We do longer time scale simulations for real data, some collected in Portugal, and the reason why, and some notations and billing structure used from California. Why two different places is because getting data for active and reactive load and separately was difficult to find online for free. I'll show a brief numerical result which shows why co-optimization and why and how co-optimization can be beneficial. So there are 5 different models here. So the first model performs only arbitrage. The second performs arbitrage plus power factor correction. The third performs all the 3 that we have denoted here. Then similarly for other cases. So what we see is, suppose, so this is for one battery. What we see, if this battery is performing arbitrage, the gains are high compared to other gains, but at the same time it increases the penalty because it increases the peak at certain time. So there is a negative gain, and if you see the total gain is slightly lower. And similarly, if someone is performing only peak demand saving, then the arbitrage gains is getting negative. So performing co-optimization and combining all these goals together significantly outperforms other methods. So now I present the case study for Madeira. So Madeira has 48 consumer contracts and a time varying electricity price. And based on these time variation of electricity price and zero selling price, so consumers are not allowed to supply power back to the grid. So clearly arbitrage and self-sufficiency is coming out of the pricing structure. Then they also impose what is the maximum demand the consumer is going to consume over the day, and they have to fix it. So if they exceed that maximum demand, then there's a local power cut, and they need to again restart their energy meter locally. So which can be damaging to devices. So you need to ensure that the peak is respected. Furthermore, energy backup is also included, considering that many places you don't have a reliable power supply. So batteries can be used for backup during certain outage. So these are the goals for this setting, and what we observe is using real data, we observe that this formulation can be done in a convex setting. And if we consider, using numerical result, if we consider the degradation of the battery, we can calculate that the simple payback period for batteries is less than 3 years, which is amazing in this case. And some key numerical observations are that battery peak demand saving directly governed by the ramping capability. It is less of a factor of how big the battery is rather than how much power it can ramp in at certain time. Now, whenever the DG at the home end is more than the inelastic load, then only storage can be used, or increasing self-sufficiency. So what self-sufficiency means is how much self-sufficient I am, so how much energy that I'm consuming, what portion of energy I'm generating by myself. So if someone is 100% self-sufficient, that means that all the energy that they are consuming are generated locally. So in this case, we observe that each home using undersized DG generating can be up to 25% to 40% self-sufficient. So yeah, and the strategy that we present can be used to select the best suited contracts which consumer can opt for. We have done some extension for this work, but not detailed in the thesis. Okay, so moving on to the third part, which is how utility scale storage can be used. So utilities have different goals. So their goal is how to increase the reliability of the power network, and how do we reduce the curtailment of renewable energy. So here we present two applications. The first deals with phase balancing, for which we identify the problem and using network-based simulations, and we see that if the phase is imbalanced, then it can create problems, and which storage can facilitate in solving it. The second application is control of fleet of batteries, for which we are using stochastic distributed control using localized Markovian dynamics. Then we also show that such a control will be stable using classical control tools. So going into the first application, which is phase. Okay, so these are some publications associated with this part. Most of them are under review. As I mentioned, most of the DGs are single phase in low voltage networks, and most of EV, if they are not charging at a rate more than 32 amperes, then they can use single phase. So most of the EV chargers are also single phase. Now consider a lot of these DGs and EVs connected to one of the phases, and which can significantly create an unbalance between the three phases. So since there was not enough literature, we created stylized simulations using OpenDSS and injecting these unbalances into the network, and observed what these unbalances will create. So what we see is for a three-phase 4-wire radial distribution network, imbalance in the network can cause voltage unbalance factor going above, say, 1 or 2%, which is the criteria. It can increase losses in the neutral and in the phases. Now, the key idea is, can we use batteries or any in future, maybe some form of flexibility to solving this problem and creating the balance. Now, if we can do that, like what will be the size of the battery in such case? So if my imbalance is 10 megawatt and I'm using 10 megawatt battery for solving it, it's a very bad solution. So what we see is, in this case, there's an imbalance created, and we put 20% size of battery at the end of the feeder for a radial distribution network, and we observe that for a 20% imbalance magnitude battery ramping size, we can significantly deteriorate, in this case, voltage deviation. Which means that batteries can facilitate balancing. And then we present a case study for a substation in Madeira. So we collected data for longer time scales. During the day, we observed whenever the solar generation was there, the imbalance was increasing, which means because most of these DGs were connected to one of the phases. So we think that if and there is in future there is an ad hoc growth of renewables, it can create significant imbalance. Second application is tracking of regulation signal, which is providing an ancillary service to the utility. For example, say some of the balancing authorities generate a regulation signal, and this regulation signal indicates their needs, whether someone should increase consumption because there is too much power in the network, or decrease consumption because there is scarcity of power. So suppose fast ramping resources are spread in a geographical space. Now how do we control this large number of batteries? So this is an extension of my supervisor's work on load control, distributed load control applicable to batteries. So the key challenges associated in this part of the problem is is similar to what they have already dealt with loads, is distributed control with minimum communication. Now we also need to propose nominal behavior for batteries, which was derived from the quality of service of batteries, like batteries should not be charged beyond certain level and they should increase the idle time. So the more we use the battery, the less is the life of the battery. So we would like to maximize the life of the battery, or increase in this case. And how do we deal with charging and discharging asymmetries, and will the solution be scalable, or will depend on what is the number of batteries in the fleet? So what we observe is we can have a dual loop control system in which the outer loop is So the outer loop has takes into account the aggregated behavior of the fleet, and from the centralized control signal there is a scalar signal which is generated and broadcasted to all these batteries, and the batteries have a local decision room which tries to follow what the central controller wants, at the same time maintain these quality of factors which we already mentioned. So with this I conclude my third part, and in the fourth part we take into account the health of the battery. So as I mentioned, the batteries degrade over time, and we need to make sure that batteries last longer, so that and that can be done by reducing the operation of life, and that can be done by reducing the low returning transaction. So the first idea here is how do we match the degradation of the battery based on age, so how long it's going to live and how many cycles it's operating. So we have a bunch of publications which are already described in this part, and the second contribution is for considering not just one goal of tracking regulation signal, but considering two goals of maintaining the SOC of the fleet, at the same time tracking the regulation signal. So we propose the LQR based controller design, and furthermore we add an additional layer of gain scheduling which gives more importance to maintaining SOC if the SOC drifts farther away from the desired set point. So that's all from my side. I'll conclude my presentation, and so in this thesis we present storage control and optimization in power networks, considering the transformations which are undergoing. We presented several applications and how we can co-optimize these applications. We presented computationally efficient tools such as convex optimization, randomized stochastic control, and which uses optimal thresholds. We evaluate these claims using case studies from real data from contemporary power networks from different geographical regions. Further, we add or integrate the lithium-ion battery limitations, such as how long they can, the life factor into the optimization and control that we propose. We observe that with growing volatility in power system in generation and load side, the applicability of batteries will grow further, and this will be even more relevant in future. The key perspectives and the problems that I would love to work in future is how do we select the best batteries for certain applications. So in this case we observe that the battery, how they should operate, should be curtailed based on what kind of applications that we are targeting. So applications are crucial. Then there are certain external factors such as load variation for a home or a renewable generation at the consumer end. Then storage parameters, because we don't have availability of all the storage parameters, so we need to fix like what kind of battery we are using and what what parameters they have. The second problem that I'm very interested to work on is how much look-ahead horizon for hydro facilities will be required. So in this case, we have observed a sub-horizon based structure. And how can we identify a sub-horizon or spread of this sub-horizon for hydro facilities? Because it can, for slow ramping batteries, we know that this the look-ahead horizon will be higher, but how higher, how much will be optimal for these facilities is a crucial question. Then how do we place DGs and low storage and new infrastructure in the network is a very interesting problem. This will take into account network attributes and also take this should be integrated with optimal power flow and what kind of network attributes we have. So how can we transpose this understanding that we have of batteries into something as virtual batteries is also an interesting direction, I feel. Overall, the goal is single. The goal is to integrate large amount of renewables in the network, and minimizing energy curtailment is very interesting to me. I think these directions are some of the directions I can identify. So I strongly believe in open source. So all the codes either are already open source or we would definitely make them open source so that anyone can implement and use them, and we don't reinvent the wheel if anyone is doing that. And yeah, these are the list of publication at one place, and these are the talks and seminars that I have given over